New and experienced anglers struggle a lot with reading water. If you can't read the water correctly, you're just going to be fishing in the wrong spots and you're going to be wasting your time. Likely, you're not going to be catching very many fish. In this video, I'm going to cover where to fish, the most likely spots, and the most productive areas so that you can focus your time on catching more fish and not waste it fishing fishless water. The easiest way that I could show you where to find fish in a river if you've never been to this river before, or if this is your home water, you fish it all the time, is to fish seam lines. Seam lines are the most productive areas and the easiest ones to find, in my opinion, about fishing for rivers. The most important part of this, though, is that you're fishing walking speed water. Trout really like walking speed water. Water that is not too fast, because if they're in water that's too fast, it's going to require too much energy for them to sit in that lane. But there's not going to be any food that's going to be circulating around water that's basically not moving. So if it's too slow, they're not going to get any food. And if they sit on the seam line right between the fast and the slow water, they can dart out and get food and come right back in the slower water. But remember, walking pace is the style and the speed of water that you want to fish. Okay, to find a seam is pretty easy. You got to look for structure. You got to look for a rock that's creating a disturbance. Let's say a rock that's above the water, even rocks that are below the water create disturbance on the water. So you're going to look down the water and you're going to find something that is making a V shape. That V shape means that something is causing the water to move around either subsurface, or maybe it's a rock, a stick, maybe it's a log or something that is causing a seam line. So on the downstream side of that, the water is going to be much slower, and that's generally where you're going to find fish. Follow that seam line down to what we call a tail out, which is basically the end of the seam. And that is a honey hole of finding fish. That's where a lot of these trout sit. And you'll have different trout sitting in like the head of it, the tail of it. You'll have maybe the bulk of them kind of in the middle. And you're going to want to work those over and over and fish those very efficiently, because it is the number one place that's, in my opinion, the easiest place also to find fish. And the way to fish this is basically throw your fly in there, and I would recommend going downstream and casting upstream, because then if you go directly below it, let's say you're 10 feet below it and you cast just directly up, the advantage of that is that you're not getting any drag. Drag is where you have two different current seams pulling on your line at different angles and pulling them at different speeds. And what that's going to do is that's going to drag your fly in an unnatural manner. The bobber's going to float down and it's just going to move just a little, and you're going to get what's called micro drag. Micro drag is like where you can't tell that you're getting dragged, but the fish can see that under the water, that fly is kind of moving and skirting and just kind of not floating down, dead drifted. Dead drifted is where the fly is coming down and the fish can't tell if it's real or not, because most times in rivers, fish are just eating things that get swept up by the current, and they're not moving and they're not squirming. They're just literally just floating down the river. The river is doing its own thing with them. And so dead drifting is the best way to do this. Stand 10 feet below that seam line, cast straight up, and just let your line come to you. As your line's coming to you, you want to strip in the line and pinch it with your finger, and strip the line in and pinch it with your finger, and then get up and cast again, let your line out and have it just come down. That's the easiest way to do it. You can also do this at a 90-degree angle, but it's going to require a lot more of that mending, where you're casting 90 degrees and then you're mending right before you think there's a pot of fish. And then you're getting ready to set the hook too, because if you have too much line out there, you're going to miss those strikes and it's going to be really awkward. That's when a lot of fish come off. So it takes some time and patience to learn this, but that's the easiest way to find water to fish. The next area is pools. Pools are super easy to find, but a lot of people get really frustrated with pools because they don't catch any fish. So here's my biggest tip on after you find a pool, is to go early or late in the morning and just use the biggest streamer you can find. Streamer fishing in pools is one of the most productive ways to find water, because it's really easy to see a pool. A pool, generally, the water's going to come down and it's going to circle around and it's going to back eddy. And those fish oftentimes too are even faced the wrong direction. So if the river is going this way and the back eddy is swirling this way, the fish will actually sit this way looking down the main stem of the river, and you can actually target those fish. Sometimes you can even get in these back eddies during a hatch situation, like let's say the PMD hatch in July, let's say in Montana. You can see those fish just popping off and kind of sipping dry flies in those back eddies, those back currents. So there's two different ways and styles to fish pools: a streamer, or if you're really looking for a challenge, it's really hard to get a non-drag free. It's really hard to get a drift that doesn't have any drag on it, but you can cast it and work those pools just like you would a normal seam or a normal current in a dry fly situation. I did not know about this till a couple of years ago. I had a fly fishing guide point this out to me, and that is the fish in front of rocks. It can be incredibly productive, like on this Icelandic, like on this trip to Iceland that I had with my buddies. And the guide told me to cast in front of that rock. Now, this rock was submerged below the water, but he could see them and he knew that there were 3 rocks. And he said, just put a couple of drifts in front of each rock. And literally, the first drift that I had, I hooked a fish. It actually got caught up on the rock, but the fish was still there. And then all of a sudden, I just kept pulling on it and the fish got let off. So, watch this clip really quick. It illustrates this just perfectly.
Yeah.
Yeah, you want me to go down?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Straight out 20 feet. That's the first stone. So don't go.
My guide kept directing me, and for some reason, he knew exactly where this fish was laying.
Okay, do it again, similar. Very good. You're stuck in the stone. Just go and get it. It's fine. You fished it.
No way!
It was not stuck.
That is ridiculous. That was, I kept tugging on it. I thought that was a fish. I thought it was a stick or a rock. You see how hard and how many times I was like tugging on that thing?
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't moving.
Yeah.
You saw. How did that happen? I don't even know how that's possible. Was it hooked when I was yanking on it?
Wow.
Turns out that I just got a little bit south,
Wow.
just a little bit north of the Georgia
Another monster, man. I think it could be the longest one. Look at that. Look at that trout.
Dude,
My friend.
that's every one I catch is bigger than the last one.
Dude, give us a real smile, man.
That is a real smile. Look at that.
Big old, like, super smile.
Dude, look, my left hand is like shaking. Look at the side, look at the jaw on that thing.
The next place to look for fish is submerged rocks. So just because you don't see a rock or a seam or something above the water, a lot of times if you have polarized glasses, you can see a stump, a log. This works really well in lakes, but also in rivers, that a hiding place for fish, a break in the seam. Anything in the river that creates a break in the seam, fish will stack up behind it. So submerged rocks is absolutely key. And a lot of people overlook this. I see a lot of people fishing just your natural seams where you have a big rock, you have a V, and then you're fishing, but they skip all the riffly water, the water that is white water, because you have a bunch of boulders, like a boulder field is creating a lot of current. And a lot of people skip that. They don't look at rocks that are below the water as good fishing holes and places to hold fish. And honestly, they miss out on some of the biggest fish that I've ever caught are out of these locations. So don't overlook submerged rocks. Even if they aren't creating a huge wake on the top of the water, it is definitely creating a big break in the water, creating some soft water for those trout to sit in front of it and behind it, and to the sides behind it, like that V we talked about. Another thing is to skip glassy water. It does hold fish. Let's say you're floating in a drift boat and there's just maybe a quarter mile of just glossy water. There's almost no breaks in it. There are fish in there, especially if it's really deep. There are fish down there, but don't waste your time, because in order to get your fly down there to catch those fish, you might hook one. It might be really big, but you've just wasted 2 hours trying to hook that fish and play that fish. It's probably not going to be worth your time. I'm a little bit more into getting the numbers of the fish and just figuring out what I already know and honing in on that. The areas that are perfectly flat and featureless, generally, that's where you're going to see guides just skip over that water. You hire a guide, they're just going to row really fast through sections of water, and you're going to be wondering, why is this happening? Why are you not letting me fish? They're just going to tell you, take the fly, put it in your hand, and just sit on it. We haven't caught a fish in this section in 5 years. It's because they don't fish it, because it's not very productive. So if you hire a guide, you'll notice this as a fact. And if you haven't ever hired a guide, or you didn't know that flat, skinny water isn't super productive, I would just skip it unless you see rising fish. But again, if you see fish like potting up and coming up and eating dry flies off the surface, because there is no break in the water, that is one of the most challenging dry fly situations, because everything has to be perfect. you pretty much have to have your fly is the first thing the fish sees, and before the tippet, before the leader, perfect cast, perfect position. And then you also have to set it correctly, and it just becomes very difficult. So some people like that challenge. Generally, I would say to stay away from water that is perfectly flat and featureless. Another place that I have to mention is undercuts. Now, brown trout love to sit in these undercuts where they can come out and they can ambush prey. Undercuts and pools go hand in hand. That's really easy to find and see. But sometimes trout are sitting right there's you have a grassy bank and you have an undercut um, basically within maybe 4 or 5 inches from the bank, and then it gets really shallow. A lot of times those fish, especially brown trout during like hopper season, are going to sit in those little troughs. They have a little bit of protection. The sun's not on them and beating on their eyes like all day. So it is a really good place. Undercut banks, especially with the dry dropper system, dry flies, stone flies, chubby Chernobyls, and especially during hopper season, that can be just an absolute blast. Here's a little bit of footage from a trip that I had in Montana where we found a glassy bank. Didn't really look very fishy to me, but the guide said look downriver and cast in there, and there's always fish on this bank. And he was right. We caught a really, really nice looking brown trout in here. So banks can be another place. You can pound them with streamers. You can pound them with dry flies, dry droppers, something that floats up really high. Don't put a dry dropper on there or use nymphs because you're just going to get caught up a whole bunch. But it's another great place to look, and because fish sit in these areas. So that's all I got for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next.